Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I am your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I am Alton, sometimes called Pops Gansky, and I'm the one of the authors of the Remnant series, a series of novellas, which I've been working on and hope to finish here in the next few days. The next one will be called The Village. More weirdness.
Great.
More weirdness.
And I'm Molly Jo Riley. I am producer of the podcast, writer of the Unemployment Cookbook, and my work in progress is currently NOLA, a mystery location set in New Orleans. And this week's cat is Barry Sunshine.
This week's cat.
Well, they like to interrupt the podcast, so I figured there's no getting around it. We may as well just put him on camera.
Just introduce him, huh?
Yeah, just say, hey.
We need to get a sponsorship from some sort of kitty litter. This
Tidy
week's
Cat.
episode brought to you by Tidy Cat.
I'll work
There's
on
a
that.
there's a magic podcast I listen to called Judge Cast, and one of the hosts has 3 cats. And he's got Battle Cat, Milkshake, and Bitty Kitty. And so they talk about their cats sometimes, and it's great. So whenever I write them a question, I always form it in the form of, okay, so Bitty Kitty is playing against Battle Cat. So,
Okay.
Good times. All right, enough of that.
Oh, Molly, since you're a cat lover, there's
Yes.
a series of mysteries that are very famous. The Cat Who books. They're short, cozy
Ooh.
mysteries. The cat who did this, the cat who did that.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Look them up.
See my book library starting to expand. Knowing you people has expanded my books, my library, my writing,
But not your
my
cats.
plate collection. No, not my cats, thankfully. So this is
And
this one's pretty quiet most of the time, except she does love attention, as you can tell.
Yeah, I've got a cat too. I'm ready to give it back to the shelter. So,
Lies.
moving on. So, reminder to those of you listening on the audio podcast, you can watch us live Tuesdays at 6:30 in the p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're here usually at 6:30, sometimes at 6:31, sometimes at 6:32. You can email us at firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. I keep forgetting to mention that. I always say, oh, just email us, and I never tell you what the email address is. And now I am. So hooray for that. firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. You can reach us there. Now, this week's Ask the Author question is somewhat significant because for a couple of reasons. First of all, it came from my sister, Pops, your daughter. That's amazing how that happens. Imagine that. And also because it is the final question that was submitted in my first solicitation of Ask the Author questions. And so I'll probably put another one out on Facebook and or Twitter or both. And whatever questions you have, just go ahead and reply to that, and I'll keep track of them all. Otherwise, you can always find us at aarongansky.com, or you can send them in at firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. I feel like I've plugged us about 22 times.
Excellent.
That's too many plugs. We're going to overload some circuits, so let's get to it. Our Ask the Author question from Crystal Fretz, whom I love dearly with all my heart. She says, how do you get past writer's block? My answer is I don't. I just kind of weep under my desk quietly for hours and hours. So, sorry. No. It depends on the type of block.
I've seen it.
Yeah, it is true. It really depends on the type of block. I maintain there are 2 types of writer's block. There's the kind that comes from not having any ideas, and the other kind that comes from having too many ideas and not knowing what to do with them. But the most common one is not knowing where to go, where to take your story, what direction you want your story to go. And so in context of that, what I like to do is increase my artistic input. So for me, that's movies, photography. Crystal is a photographer. She's a fantastic photographer, as is her husband. I'll watch movies. I'll read books, go to museums, all types of things that stimulate all sorts of ideas to write about and directions that I can take my story. I also have a select group of very close friends that I consider alpha readers that I can bounce ideas off of them. My wife, I can always talk to her about my writing, and she'll nod and say, uh-huh. And sometimes that's all I need for a breakthrough, is just to talk things through out loud. One of the other strategies is just to plow through, just to keep writing. I did that with one of the books, and I realized that 90% of what I write over the next couple of days / weeks is not going to be usable. but writing it is going to help me get to where I need to be to start writing good stuff, producing good pages. And so I say there's really two ways to handle it. You can attack it head on and just keep writing, or you can kind of retreat and try and increase your input and take a little bit of time away if you need to refresh your brain. So it depends on the type of writer's block, really. Pops, what about you?
Well, once you're a professional writer, you can't allow writer's block to go on very long. But there's really several things that I've tried. I've tried writing in different places. I'll run out to Starbucks and work there for a while. Move to a different place in the house if need be. Sometimes we need to understand what it is that causes writer's block, and one of the things is sometimes we're just tired, and what we need is rest. So a nap is always a good thing. Sometimes a couple days off is a good thing. Let the subconscious keep doing the work. So change things up a little bit. I've also been known to skip ahead if I just can't figure this scene out and I don't know where to go with it. I just put a chapter number and a title to it, and then I insert a page break, and then I start the next chapter. And it doesn't matter if it's 5 chapters down. When they make a movie, they don't do it in sequence. They shoot all the shots that's going to be in this building, and then over at this location they'll shoot all those shots and all the others, and they'll go out of order. So I don't know if you've ever seen this or not, Aaron, but there's a movie script, and that's what all the actors get, and then there's a shooting script, and that's what all the technical people get who are doing the backgrounds and stuff like that, and those are not in order. It's how they're going to shoot it, and so you can do the same thing in writing novels. Nothing says you have to do it from chapter 1 through chapter 25 or however many chapters there are. You can go 1, 2, 3, 12. It doesn't really matter, and sometimes that will open the doors. So, and then I do like you do. I sometimes watch movies. That helps me out quite a bit. So that's pretty much it. I think it's the real cure is just to keep writing, even if it's nonsense. Brainstorm ideas. I've done that, and I know I'm going to throw out all but one of the ideas, but that's okay. Miners, Al's axiom number 26. A miner has to move a lot of dirt to find a diamond. So it's the same thing with writing. Sometimes you just have to keep putting out ideas, and well, what about this? What if I tried this? What if this? And then all of a sudden something will catch, and then you can move on from there.
In the show notes you say that's Al's axiom number 13. So I just want to call attention that you somehow doubled it. And also, if we have any Star Trek fans watching or Lord of the Rings fans, they're gonna crucify you with your inconsistencies. And so at some point you're just gonna have to write them all down, Pops, and just be consistent with it. The listenership is clamoring. They want Al's axioms in a nice, easy-to-read handbook. So they got to read something while they're on the toilet, I suppose, huh?
Well, yeah. I think you're wrong because it says Al's axiom number 26. I know that because I just changed it.
Oh, hey, look at that. Boy, is my page red.
Oh, I love the digital age.
Oh, indeed. All right. Molly Jo, what about you in writer's block? What's your strategy?
I honestly don't remember how I originally answered Crystal. I know I had a couple of responses, and the only one I really remember is alcohol. I would tend to have a nice small half a glass sip or two of wine. Excuse me a second. Go away. No. That's one of the other cats that just likes to show up on camera. Writer's block for me, I will do everything that you guys have mentioned. I'll write in a different area of the house. I'll go out of the house to a Starbucks, to a restaurant. I'll work on something else. If I'm working on NOLA and I'm getting into a scene that I can't comprehend, I'll read something like it. I'll put on music. I'll watch a movie. I'll write poetry. I'll write gibberish. I'll copy down song lyrics from popular music. Anything to keep me writing as long as I'm writing. And when I find if I'm actively writing, or I play games, a lot of stuff I'll put together jigsaw puzzles, or for some reason I'm hooked on certain games on my phone. I don't know who, Aaron, would have gotten me into certain match 3 games like Puzzle Quest, but there it is.
I don't know.
I don't know. It's like these people know me and they say, hey, you should try this. And then I hear the voice of your wife and my mother, and everybody's saying, don't give her anything else to distract her. But it still happens. But I play a lot of games. While I'm consciously playing the games, in the background, my mind is working on other things. I can see Patty Shell in the chat room saying, Molly, Molly. Yeah, that's, I know, Patty, I know. We'll talk later.
Hot showers, that's another good one. I kind of relax a little bit, kind of relieve some of the stress, kind of get the mind flowing.
And what notes in the shower?
Yeah, we in our
something to put in the shower. While they're in the shower, because of the white noise, they come up with brilliant ideas, and there's no place to write it, so they buy these things. You put them in the shower, and you write on the walls.
What are those called again? Aqua notes?
Something like that. Yeah.
That was in our Gifts to Give Writers episode from right around Christmas time. So, good times. Well, we are talking about character now. It's a new month. It's March. Does it feel like March, guys?
Yes.
March is just spring is marching along over here in SoCal, and winter is long left. 2 weeks ago, it got out of town early. It'll come back.
Somebody had a birthday toward the end of February.
Well, it wasn't me.
It wasn't me.
George Washington on the 22nd.
No, I'm thinking somebody just a few days ago. Who could that have been, Al?
That probably would be Old Man Gansky.
Happy birthday, Al.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Pops. I still am trying to figure out how you're only 39 and I'm only 38. So,
well,
good job.
This was the 33rd anniversary of my 30th birthday. So.
Oh, that's math. Don't make us do math. We're writers. We don't math. So. Wow, impressive, impressivo. So, happy birthday, Pops!
Thank you.
Got you a typewriter. Why don't you show everyone the typewriter that I got you?
Well, when we started, I was feeling bad about that because I was going to do that, but now since I changed my setting, I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I can reach it.
Well,
I think it falls down.
You go ahead and work on that, and in the meanwhile, Aaron, look in the chat room, and Becky is harassing me about the Backstreet Boys.
Oh, goodness.
So I just thought while Pops was getting his typewriter that you can join the bandwagon and harass me.
Ah.
Alrighty,
Nice.
so Aaron got this for me.
Nice.
Yeah, it was too cheap for a real typewriter, so.
I'm like,
That's exactly right.
It doesn't look real, but okay.
I love it. It's a. It looks like it's based on an old Underwood. It holds pens. Whoops, let me get it back over here. It holds pens, and it now sits in the honored spot where my coffee cup sits, and unfortunately it's really difficult to drink out of, so I'm going to keep using the cup.
Sitting at the right hand of the coffee cup. That's
very nice.
All right, let's get on with it, Aaron, here.
Yeah, it is a new month, and it is a new topic done here. So characters, mind, and emotion is what we're talking about tonight, but this whole month is going to be focused on character development. Now, some of these things we've talked about before on other podcasts, but it's been months, if not years, since we've touched on the topic, and so we thought we'd kind of revisit it. And again, we wanted to bring you something this year that was a little more streamlined, a little more on target, if you will, kind of structured. And so, talking about the different elements of writing fiction, and now we come to one of the three quintessential elements of fiction, and that is character. And so tonight we're going to look specifically at the mind and the body of our characters. And Pops, if you want to, you kind of look at characters in four elements. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it really is how you define these things. Many years ago, when I was going around teaching these kinds of things for different reasons, I had created a little chart, which is a rectangle that you draw an X through from corner to corner, and you end up with four things. So I divide really emotion, mind and emotion, into four parts: the mind, the body, the emotion, and the spirit. And I'll talk about the spirit one in a little bit because people get nervous about that, and no, there's no sermon coming. Mind is the seat of thought. It's where we reason. It's where our hopes are, our dreams, our fears. So our characters will process these things in their mind. The body is that physical component. This is the obvious one. And the conduit of emotion. So, because every emotion is felt physically. And so if there are things that can affect your body, it will affect your emotions. And so that's important to keep in mind in characterization. Has some trauma happened that changes a person's emotional state? So the body is connected to all of this. Then emotions. Emotion comes from a compound Greek word. It's E and motion. It would be in motion, and so that's simply what it means. It's movement within inside a person, and that's what we feel. And it's usually a response to something, good or bad. You can be happy, you can be sad, but all of those come in physical form. That's how we know we're having them. And then spirit. People get nervous about this because they think you have to have a sermon in every book, and no, you don't. It's that every individual has some kind of spiritual component, even the most die-hard atheist. That is their spiritual component. That they're pulling away from anything like that. That in itself is a spiritual decision of some sort. I live in Central California, and I can, in very short order, walk from my house to Catholic nunnery, to a Sikh temple for Punjabis. We have a lot of Punjabis in the area. I can make a right, and I can hit a Muslim place of worship. I can hit several Baptist places, and just in a probably less than 5-mile walk, I can hit a dozen different things from all over the world. So there is a spiritual component, and in characterization and in their emotions, when we talk about those kinds of things, there is some spiritual aspect. Now, it doesn't always have to mean God talk, but there is that sense of right and wrong. What C.S. Lewis talked about, he used to say he knows God exists because of a parking place. Someone steals your parking place, you get out and you say, that's my spot, I saw it first. The other one said, no, it's mine, I got here first. And so now it's a question of what is moral and what is right and what is wrong, and the idea is who came up with the idea of right and wrong. So even something as simple as that, we all act in some kind of spiritual sense. So those 4 things, mind, body, emotion, and spirit, and they all tie together. They're not separate. They're all hooked together. So the best characters you find in fiction have all of those things working for them. The weaker stories you read are from writers who usually don't like emotion. And I know some good ones. Their advice from their editors and their readers and when they put a book out is you got to put a little emotion in. You don't need tons of it, but you got to put some of it in there. Others don't like too much description or whatever. But anyway, you need all of those things in some formula, some balance.
I like the way you say that, and it is important to remember that all 4 of these work together. We're going to talk about emotion later on, and like you say, it's to be moved within, but there's a physical component of that, like you say, and we'll talk about that more. But the interplay between the 2 is significant. My emotions will dictate how I physically feel. All right, when we're depressed, we feel lethargic, we feel burnt out, we don't want to move. But also on the same token, if we are in peak physical health, usually we don't get as depressed. Now, this is not a blanket statement. Obviously, there are some exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, if you're in good physical health, you can usually maintain pretty decent mental health. But if your mental health is bad, sometimes your physical health goes down as well. And so there's an interplay between the 2. And one of the battles that doctors and physicians fight is that battle to keep people's spirits up when they are facing incredible odds. And when they've been delivered, let's say, terminal news, how do you keep somebody's spirits up in that kind of a situation? Because it's important to their physical healing as well. And of course, from a spiritual aspect, that can also affect your mental health. If you believe in a greater power, a higher power, sometimes you have something larger than yourself to rely on, and you have things like faith to fall back on, etc. So there's always, some interplay between these 4 aspects, and like you say, the best characters are developed in all 4 areas. Their writers are very cognizant of this. Whether they're doing it instinctively or intentionally, they will develop all 4 areas.
But not necessarily to the best results. Your antagonist will have all 4 areas, but something will be awry somewhere. So they're lacking something. So when I used to use this little diagram where I'd have this rectangle and I draw next to the middle, and I'd use these 4 components, I would say to whatever conference I was leading, if you have someone who is emotions are balanced and they're in good shape physically, and their mind, they're thinking clearly, and they have a strong spiritual component. Who do you have? Well, at the maximum, you have Jesus. Now you take out someone who has bad emotions, doesn't manage emotions very well, have a fine mind, but in this particular case, I'm going to use it was poor in body and had no spiritual aspect whatsoever, and you end up with Hitler. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of gauge that, and so you can have the bad person missing something. There's nothing more frightening than somebody who has no emotion.
And we want to, and we talk about people who don't have emotions. We like look at the Vulcans, let's say, but even Vulcans have emotions. I thought one of the most interesting aspects of Star Trek: The Next Generation. That's my show, right? I cut my teeth, my Star Trek teeth on that show. It's the one I love with all of my heart. And one of the most interesting ones is where I think his name is Sarek, Spock's father, goes through that's Vulcan tradition of where he gets old and almost senile, but it's like all the emotions that he's repressed for centuries is finally coming out, and it's this outpouring, and he does this little mind meld with Patrick Picard, or Patrick Stewart, Captain Picard, and to kind of allow some of the emotion to pass from him so that Picard can help him through this difficult process. And not only is there fantastic acting, I mean, just Patrick Stewart is phenomenal on his own, but playing that range of emotions is unbelievable to see that. And that's the thing. So nobody's truly free of emotions. They might be devoid of things like human empathy. I teach high school. I know all about people who are devoid of human empathy, like teenagers. But they still feel for themselves. And like you say, Pops, it's really important to remember that your antagonists need to be fully developed as well. Whether that's fully developing their lack of development in a particular area, you still need to develop that, like Hitler, per se. I remember talking with Steve McLean, who used to host a show with me back in the day, and I was talking to him about my work in progress at the time, Hand of Adonai, and he goes, well, who's the bad guy? And I tell him, and he goes, so why is he evil? And I go, well, he just wants to take over the world or something. He goes, no, why is he evil? And I'm like, well, because he has to be, otherwise I don't have a story. Like, that was what I was coming up with. And he said to me, I'll never forget this, he said, try and avoid characters who are evil for the sake of being evil. Try and avoid evil for evil's sake. Instead, everyone is the hero of their own story. So in what way is your antagonist playing out his or her heroic ambitions? And that makes a much more interesting character. Otherwise, you look at these kind of two-dimensional. When we talk about characters, don't we say that? We use that term, two-dimensional cardboard cutouts. They're flat. It's because there's no depth to them, and that depth comes from the balance between mind and emotion and body and spirit. So I feel like we've talked a lot about this. Should we kind of jump in now a little bit more, Pops,
sure,
to the mind?
Let me say this: when dealing with antagonists, one of the great things you can do, the best things you can do, is skew the balance of these four things: body, mind, emotion, and spirit, and take one of them completely out, and diminish another. And some of the scariest antagonists I've written have been brilliant in mind but weak in body, and having really no moral, spiritual aspect to them at all, or having almost no emotion and being brilliant in mind and even brilliant in body, but they just really don't care and don't feel. And they've made some of the most terrifying antagonists that I've created and I've had to live with while I write the book.
Yeah. But again, it's like a scale, like you say, right? So where one thing shrinks, perhaps another area grows. It's a sliding scale. I like how you say that. So, well, when we talk about mind, we do talk about, we think specifically of, I think of it in kind of two different ways, personality types and their mental stability. And we've done a couple podcasts on this, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but there are some great resources. Pops, before I jump too far into this, you wanted to define what we mean by personality and person?
Yeah, very quickly. I think it's good to keep some of these things in mind. Uh, the definition of personality is it's a combination of characteristics that make an individual unique in some way. So remember I talked about skewing these things, and this applies to the major characters in our book, whatever they're good at, whatever they're bad at, whatever makes them fractured, whatever makes them brave. That's the definition of a personality. It's this combination of characteristics. So all your major characters are going to have a personality that you have to get across. While we're thinking of it, what does it mean to be a person? A person has three components, and this will apply to our characters again. Intellect, emotion, and volition. Volition is sometimes called will. So intellect, emotion, and will. Intellect, I think. Emotion, I feel. Will, I take action. I make decisions. I do something, be it good or bad. So in drawing your characters up, if you want them to be believable, both emotional and mentally, excuse me, the reader needs to see those three things in some fashion or another.
Absolutely. And again, those play together very nicely. You can't have a character that doesn't think. You can't have a character that doesn't feel. You can't have a character that doesn't act. You've got to do those three things. So, in context of personality types, one of the resources that I use most often is 16personalities.com. That's the number 16personalities.com, and it's a good reminder that, for the most part, depending on which school of psychology you subscribe to, that most people in the world are going to fall into one or two of these categories of these 16 different personalities. You've probably heard terms like introvert versus extrovert. They also explore things like thinking versus feeling, perceiving, planning versus those who are very spontaneous. And some of the basic fundamentals are really spelled out there on 16personalities.com, so I don't want to go into great detail, but I thought I might talk to you a little bit about the difference between an introvert and an extrovert, and how, one of the other great things is that 16 personalities tells you how opposites attract. It tells you this personality type likes this personality type, and so they're going to try and find a way to meet up, if you will. And so you can find, if you're writing romance, you can find, your character is probably going to be interested because of this personality type, will probably be attracted to that kind of personality type. Introverts versus extroverts. My wife is an extrovert. She enjoys hanging out with people and talking and having a good time, and I'm perfectly content to sit at home by myself. I'm totally happy with that. As a matter of fact, I don't like being in places where there are a lot of people. It causes me like actual anxiety. One of the worst times of my life, this is perhaps getting a little too personal, but my wife brought me to a birthday party for my son, Levi, who was 4 at the time. And she brought me to this party where I didn't know any of the children or any of the adults of the children. And so I was there, and the only people I knew were her and my boys. And so I basically sat with my son, my oldest son, Josiah, and we talked to each other and tried not to talk to anybody else the entire day because we were so ridiculously uncomfortable. And Naomi was just making the rounds, talking with all her friends, making new friends, and Elijah was just, super excited and happy because new people to be friends with. And Josiah and I are like, please don't look at us. Please go away. Please don't talk to us. But there was like an actual anxiety, there. And, my wife and I had to talk about that. Like, this is not an area where I'm comfortable. This is not something that I don't do well in this kind of a situation. But those are the areas where she thrives and she really takes control. You've got leaders and you've got followers. Then you've also got people like reluctant leaders who end up leading even though they're not like trying to grab authority and make people follow them, but they're kind of thrust into situations that they don't necessarily feel comfortable in, but they rise to the occasion. So there are these different types of personalities that you can see, and I encourage you as writers to really think about this and ask yourself which personality types do your characters fall into, and please avoid the trap of making them all exactly like you. Try and stretch yourself. And this is where it becomes difficult. Me writing about an extrovert, I don't know what that's like. I have to just think, okay, what would Naomi do in this situation? oh, she would this would be fun for her. She would enjoy it. She would talk to people. She would make small talk. What would I do in this situation? Hide in the corner and cry under the desk. So different ways of handling the same thing. And so think about that. Put your character in different situations. See how they react to it, and try and let them be different people. Base them on real people that you know, if you want to. But just avoid I think a lot of writers are naturally introverts, so they end up writing about introverts. So I don't know if that's true. That's just kind of how I'm feeling right now. I feel like I've also been talking way too much. I'm incredibly self-conscious. Please stop looking at me.
You're on a video podcast. Everybody's looking at you.
I'm going to mute my camera real quick. So
Great way to scare him off there for a while there, Al.
I just like watching him twist in the wind. So, but you make a very good point about mixing it up. And every writer in writing fiction is going to have to write a character that is nothing like them. And my first real experience was was when I had a female protagonist, and I had a lot of learning to do. I didn't know the language of clothing. I really didn't know the language of shoes. Men have dress shoes, they have boots, they have sneakers. What more do you need? So I really didn't understand women's shoes, and so I had to get some help. And fortunately, my wife let me into the lodge, took me through the mall and showed me all these things. Boy, that wasn't embarrassing at all. I said, these are spectator pumps. Why are they? Don't ask. They're just spectator pumps. And then over time, I learned some of these things. But we have to do that. And if you're going to have, depending on what your antagonist is, if he or she's going to be pretty evil, and you may not be evil, you're going to have to think in those terms, at least while you write that character.
I remember walking into your office and you had all these catalogs just open to all the women's clothing everywhere, just everywhere I looked, and I don't even remember what I came in for, but I said, "Hey, Pops, do we need to have a talk?"
I did. I collected a bunch of catalogs because, again, I didn't know the lingo. So I would find a model in one of the catalogs, like a J.C. Penney catalog or something. I don't know. They all came to the house, and I stole them from my wife. It would describe a nice ivory shell top, and I thought, man, that sounds painful. Just how can that be comfortable at all? But I learned that it wasn't referring to ocean shells. It was clam shells or something. But you learn, and it was an eye-opening experience.
That's when you were going through your Little Mermaid phase, I think.
Yeah.
So. Oh man.
Well, I would advocate, if you're writing a character that you're not familiar with like that, not only do the research but talk to people. I mean, not to point at you again here, Aaron, but when I was writing an introvert, I kind of had no idea how to write an introvert, so I had to ask you for some advice on that, right?
You did, and you're like, how would you feel in this situation? I said, I would either kill someone or myself. I would not be comfortable.
True
and you're
story.
Like, really? Yeah. I may have exaggerated.
I sent you the question, how would my character act, or is this similar, blah, 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 and I think one of your responses was, just think of me. Whenever you have a situation, just think, what would Aaron do, and write it out.
Well,
that helped a lot. Thanks.
The first time I went to the Writers Club, Molly, now
I made you sit in the front row
with you, and I was like attached to your hip, and I was like, please don't leave. You're the only one I know. Please don't leave. Just talk to me. Please don't talk to anybody else. Just talk to people. Now, of course, that I've gone more often, I've met. I mean, these people are great. They're fantastic, and you knew that, but I didn't know that, and I was terrified. So. Positive, happy ending, of course.
Yes, yay. It's good to expand your horizons with people.
Yeah, but that kind of stuff, just drives me a little bit crazy. Speaking of driving people crazy, let's talk about mental stability.
Hey, I don't want to talk. Why are you pointing? Stop looking at me.
I was hoping you caught my transition. That was a pretty solid transition.
That was a harsh transition. Hey, Molly, let's talk about mental instability. Okay, what do you want to know?
So this is where I was writing a mentally unstable character, and you told me, just what would Molly do? Just think what would Molly do?
No, I don't think I said that. I'm pretty sure we did not have that conversation.
All
I'm
right,
pretty
so
sure we had a conversation with Naomi, what was that, a year ago?
yeah,
Were you crazier than me? No, nobody's crazier than Molly Joe.
yeah, good times. So
That was great.
we're all a
I love
little
your wife.
we're all a little crazy. It's just crazy in different ways, right? And we do want to think about the mental stability of our characters. And even I think even the most confident person is probably insecure about something. Find where your characters are uncomfortable, and it's I think more important to know that than it is to know where they're competent. You need to know where your characters are strong, but you also need to know where they're weak. Where are they confident versus where are they insecure? Are they stalwart and stoic? Do they show when they're feeling threatened at all? Um, but are they able to deal with the pressures of life? How much pressure would it take exactly to break your character down? And that's perhaps a kind of a dark, twisted, sadistic thought. But we're writing fiction, and it is a sadistic art form. We have to put our characters in really uncomfortable places. And so, what's their breaking point? In The Hand of Adonai, I've had I think my favorite character in that series is Erica, and I think it's because I just put her that poor girl. I just put her through the ringer, and yet she always comes out on top somehow. But I have places where she goes and has to face some pretty dark realities about herself and who she thought she was and her history and things like that. And I think she ends up almost stealing the show from the other characters because I've put so much of that into her. I've thought so much about where she's insecure, how she hides her insecurities, where she's competent and comfortable, and where she's not. And that's what makes her kind of a dynamic character and a well-developed character.
Mm-hmm.
And so, not every character who's mentally unstable. I'm not saying that to mean that they're actually certifiably insane or that they're schizophrenic. Though we did do a great podcast on writing mentally unstable characters with Stephanie Carroll, which I sadly missed. But if you want to go down that road, listen to that podcast. But for the most part, we all feel blue from time to time. We all feel sad and down. And what is it that makes us feel sad and down? What are the triggers? What are what's the outside stimulus that's creating that mental instability on our part? When do we feel most down? When are we most optimistic? Is your character an optimist or a pessimist? I had a superintendent once that kept saying, we're optimists, but we're realists. Well, then you're not optimistic? Like, what does that mean? I just was so confused. But, is your character always excited and happy? And if they are, is that maybe a cover for something else? So think about the mental well-being of your character in that regard as well.
Yep.
You don't have anything to add to that, Pops?
Well, I didn't see the pause coming.
Yeah.
I never looked at the show notes, so I'm just kind of here.
It really is half the fun of being a writer is you get to be so many different people. And they're so different that you get to experience, and I believe writers experience a fair amount of what's going on while they're writing. Same reason we jump in a movie, we can't tell the difference between reality in a scary movie, I should say, because we can't tell the difference between reality and what is fiction when it's played before us. And if a person's deep into a book, the same thing will kind of happen. When a writer's writing the book, they ought to be deep into the book, and they will begin to experience some of those things. So, yeah, I've been depressed after writing somebody who's depressed. Or I've reacted against something that maybe one of my bad guys did, and then I would also add this: when you're showing this stuff, do emphasize the showing. Don't tell people they're depressed. Don't tell your readers he felt depressed. Show the depression. He was angry. Show the anger. What does that look like? How angry is the person? Show it, and it is far more believable, and the reader will then begin to sense what's going on, not just read about it or be told about it. They're starting to sense it and starting to feel it. And really the only way you can do that is if you're feeling it while you write it. If you're not feeling the emotion, then you're doing it wrong.
I almost feel like in some ways writers become actors. They've got to channel that kind of emotion,
Mm.
and in the same way that I don't know, do you have to feel what you're writing? Technically, no, but if you're doing it right, then you probably will. You'll allow yourself to be affected. As a matter of fact, I think as writers, it's probably a lot easier to be affected by our writing than it is for other people. Because if I'm kind of, feeling depressed and I write a poem about depression and I hand it off to Molly, she may not understand it at all because it just doesn't make sense or it's too telling and not showing enough. But, it came out of my heart. And so my heart doesn't really matter. The actor and the actress, they're not paid to feel sad on command. They're paid to make the audience feel sad. And so don't fall into the trap that just because it's the portion that you wrote was good enough for you, that it's going to be good enough for everybody. That being said, if it's not good enough to make you feel, probably nobody else is feeling it as well. Is that kind of a fair assessment, Pops?
Yeah, I think so. It's Al's axiom, put whatever number you want after it. If you're not moved by your writing, your readers will not be moved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've probably have it written in the show notes somewhere, or at least meant to. Write yourself into tears. Write yourself into laughter. That's one of my favorite things. I've got several books that have characters that are just as funny as can be, and I love being with them because they're a crack up. But then there are some that I don't want to be around, but I have to experience that. So if they're frightening, I need to be frightened.
Mm.
And if I'm dealing with depression, I will probably end up being depressed. And there have been a few times I've finished my scene, get up and leave for the day.
Mm-hmm.
I can't move on. I've got to go get rid of the baggage I just piled on myself. But I know that when I do that, the reader is at least going to get some of it.
I wrote a flash fiction like that, and I wrote it, and I thought, I don't know if I can submit this for publication. I don't know if I can ever read this again. And I just kind of, what is it that Joey from Friends did? He just put it in the freezer, didn't want to read the end, so he put the book in the freezer. I just kind of felt like that. I just put my story in the freezer, and because it was really ridiculously powerful and emotional, and it's tough. Sometimes you don't want to deal with that again, but it also had that same impact on the readers. So I had other people read it. What were your thoughts? Did it hit you the way I wanted it to hit you? And it did. And so I had done something right there. And a lot of that is because, as I'm going to just kind of skip down here on the show notes real quick, Pops, is that I really dialed it back. The temptation for new writers is that you want to overwrite. We've talked about how you've got to feel something when you're writing, and the new writer is going to overwrite something. It's going to be overly sentimental. It's going to be melodramatic. We say show, don't tell, so they go, okay, and they show and show and show and show and show and show and show. In some cases, you may just want to tell. Just dial it back a little bit. And what I'm getting at here, rather than he was depressed, that's very, very telling and boring. Instead, you find the one action that demonstrates his depression and show that, and so that it's very, very clear his inward state of mind by his outward action, and leave it. Just let it be on its own, and that subtlety. I mean, if you want to talk about subtlety and ratcheting things up by dialing them back, Raymond Carver's your guy. I mean, Popular Mechanics. It's a page long.
Oh.
You read it and you just, oh man, I don't know if I can do that again. Amy Hempel's In the Cemetery Where Al Jolson is Buried. It's 12 pages or something like that, and you get to the end, and I've read like 3 or 4 stories where I just don't know that I can go back and read them again. They're so powerful, and each time it's because they didn't like keep poking me and saying, be sad, be sad, be sad, be sad. They just said, here it is, and they just presented it very subtly and appropriately and very specifically and precisely. They found the single line of dialogue, the single action, whatever it was, to sell that emotion, and that emotion was sold. And it sticks with you. It sticks with you long after you turn that final page of the story.
Yeah, we want to avoid manipulating the reader. We want to give them enough freedom to invest their own imagination in it. So the showing is good, but it doesn't have to be tons of showing. Don't overdo that. Just small bits. If somebody clenches their fist, well, I gave a little example. His head throbbed, his neck tightened like spring steel, his hands clenched so hard it seemed his knuckles would burst through the skin, his stomach turned into a vat of acid. How could the Chargers think of moving from San Diego? Okay, so I didn't say he was angry. I showed that he was angry, and then in this case I try to throw a little humor into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Which is sort of an inside joke here, but...
Yeah, but the telling version of that is just simply the news that the San Diego Chargers might move made him angry, right? That's very telling, and that doesn't sell. That doesn't deliver. That's like you're reading an outline rather than experiencing it. So we need that physical sense of anger, and this is one of the main points that I want to make, is that emotion is a physical sensation, and you cannot write emotion without describing the body in some way. And most of it's internal. The stomach is boiling in acid, like you said, or the heart is thumping very quickly, and the pulse, they feel the pulse behind their temples, or whatever the case may be. What is the physical sensation of anger look like? What is the physical sensation of hate, of love, of wonder and amazement? Think about that and find those details. And what I would encourage you to do is write them all out. Write all of these details out, 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, 100, however many you can. You're not going to use them all in your book. You're going to pick 2 or 3 of the strongest ones, and you're going to save the rest for a different book or a different story. But you're going to have that list to go to, so that when you get to that scene in your book, you've got something from which you can draw. You've got some subject matter, you've got an atlas, if you will, from which you can pull different, I think I'm mixing metaphors now, different descriptions of the same kind of emotion. And so you want to just give us a little piece here, a little piece there. We'll pick it up and we'll emote. We've got empathy. Readers are very empathetic. They will feel what you want, what you show them that the character is feeling. They'll feel that. They'll pick up on it. So you want to be specific and precise with your language. You want to definitely avoid just the telling, the simple telling, and you want to avoid the over telling or the over showing. So it's a real balance that you want to do, but it's one that you really need to develop.
I was dealing with one of the other writers on the Remnant series, and as I read the book, I realized some things were missing, and I wrote, in this particular event, someone's going to have to feel something. Give us a line, maybe 2, and then I would suggest a line or 2. And there were like just 3 or 4 of those things, and I think all total, the writer had to add, maybe 10 sentences to the whole book. But it made the difference. It's because that was being overlooked. And you don't even have to be all that flowery or descriptive. You know Ernest Hemingway's 6-word short story, right? He was challenged to see if he could write a short story in 6 words, and what he submitted was baby shoes for sale, never worn. Well, I hate him for that. He puts no emotion in it. He just makes the statement, and that is sufficient for most of us to get bummed out.
No, absolutely.
We've got a little twist on it, and so sometimes you could get stuff across in 6 words. So it doesn't have to fill up pages. That's usually a beginner's mistake, to feel like the reader's not going to be able to pick up the emotion. You give them just enough, make sure it's there, move on. That's
what Aaron is often telling me, and what I've heard you just tell other people, just trust the reader.
Sure.
There's so many times, I know when I was first starting, I wanted to explain everything. Did you get this inside joke? Let me explain the inside joke. Now it's not an inside joke. Trust the reader, and if they don't pick it up, they don't pick it up. But if they do, great. I've made a brownie point. So,
if they don't pick it up, they're probably not reading carefully enough. I do encourage you to overwrite in your first draft, and the
Mm-hmm.
second draft is about cutting. The second draft is about saying, okay, I've used 5 sentences here trying to describe his depression. I'm going to scale that back to these two because they're the only ones that I need. The reader's going to pick it up. Trust the reader. They will complete the picture. We've all done it. We'll continue to do it. And that's part of the joy of reading is that we can pick something up, the small details, and it's going to affect us so profoundly. So yeah, definitely want to trust the reader.
And while we're talking about that, we might as well go ahead and talk about the next item on the list, and that is be realistic with your prose. Uh, New writers are usually horrible about this because they think they have to be grandiose in their writing, are melodramatic. For those who may not know what melodrama is, in I think it's Santa Paula, not far outside of Ventura from Ojai, they used to have a melodrama theater, and you could go and watch old-style melodrama. Melodrama is where they overact on purpose. This is such a part of the show, is that they come out, the actors come out and tell you what to do. When he walks in, you boo and hiss. And if you don't boo and hiss when a white Snidely Whiplash walks in, they'll stop the play and he'll look at you. And he'll keep trying to get you to boo and hiss more and more until it becomes second nature. We sometimes want to try to do that kind of thing in writing. And I remember I was asked to endorse a book. I think it was the first book I had to say, no, I can't endorse it. But there was just so much of that, and some of it was ridiculous. It was a female character, and she was in law enforcement, and she had an affair with this other guy who was in law enforcement, and she's thinking, and she's saying, why? Oh, why won't he ask me about the son he doesn't know he has? And I remember thinking, what? At this point, I think this person should not be carrying a gun, because that is really kind of scary. So you can't realize that contradiction. Don't overdo it. Make your prose realistic, and don't write the emotional scenes different than you write the other scenes. Just get to the heart of it.
Absolutely. Well said. You want to be precise. You want to get in, you want to get out. You're a boxer. You've got to kind of plan your movements, and you want to get in, pack a punch real quick, and then kind of move back out. And that takes a lot of practice. This is not something you're going to get the first try or the second try or the third try. You're going to have to keep at it. Best recommendation: read the greats, and see how they do it, study how they do it, analyze it. Again, I will say Raymond Carver, Ernest Hemingway. Those are kind of the minimalist style short story writers, and of course Hemingway was also a novelist. But I think short stories really get it. Short story writers really understand how to get that emotional impact very quickly without overdoing it. And so if you want to know how to do it, read some short fiction. So there you go. And then avoid cliches, our last point here. Avoid cliches like the plague. Okay, so there you go. Cliches often pop up when we're talking about emotion, and that's because we don't know the precise way to express the emotion, and that's usually because we're just going back to the same descriptions we've heard time and time again: heart hammered, or galloped like a horse, and all the other ones. Cried tears like rivers. The cliches end up becoming melodramatic very, very quickly, and so you want to avoid them. And again, one of the ways you can do that, just scaling back. Write the cliche. I think cliches are placeholders. Dennis Fulgoni, one of my alpha readers, he puts comments in my documents now. He just goes, "Really?" ? Okay, yeah. It's a placeholder. I know this is cliche. I'm coming back. I'll fix it later. So we're kind of at that point. And then when I read his stuff, he's got incredible similes and metaphors, so I just steal them shamelessly. So there you go. Avoid cliches. So, Pops, any last minute questions, comments, concerns before we move to the room?
No, I don't think so, other than to do what you have been suggesting is just write. Don't worry about it in your first draft. First draft is getting the story told. Second draft is making it interesting. And so if you overwrite a scene, that's fine. Just keep going, because you're going to come back anyway, because all writing is rewriting. That's where the magic really happens, is in coming up with a story and writing it down. It's going back and making the thing sing. And I always thought I'd hate that part. It's the part I love the most. I get a great joy out of taking out 2 words here and adding just 1 word there to take the place of 5 and using a more descriptive term. So if you overwrite, that's fine. Don't try to do it all at once. Get the story told, then go back and ask yourself these questions. And even if you don't know at the time, like you need something emotional and you don't know what to put in there, just put a little note to yourself. Add some emotion here, and then move on. And when you come back, it'll be a reminder to you, and you can go ahead and add that in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Molly, we're coming up on time here. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns from the room?
Maya just checked in, said she thought it was a great show tonight. Becky loves your character, Erica, in Hand of Adonai. She remembers the episode of Star Trek that you were referencing earlier. She appreciates that I appreciate her harassing me, but that's nothing new. And we talked about, she's a big fan of the Lord of the Rings. And she was pretty much there are a couple, Patty said hi and harassed me once, but Becky was really the participant in the chat room tonight, and I appreciate that. Tess had a critique group this evening. They rescheduled it just for this week only to Tuesday, so she was not able to be in the chat room tonight.
I noticed that she was missing when I made a reference to a Star Trek episode, and she didn't immediately come back with the title and the show number and the season number. So,
but boy, are her ears burning.
Yeah,
I'm sure they are.
Needed our fact checker on that one. So we do miss Tess. Super happy to have Maya along, and Patty and Becky. So glad that Becky loves Erica. I love Erica
and
too.
Dave Fessenden is in the chat room also.
Dave Fessenden, who represents one amazing writer that I know, has been doing some work for him too. And so now I've got a lot of work to do ahead of me. So that's exciting. So. One quick question that just came in from Becky. I just noticed. How many rewrites? Oh, that's a good question. For a novel, I try and keep it down to about 50 rewrites of a novel. I'm joking.
Don't scare her, Aaron.
I know. I always do. For me,
Becky, no, he's wrong. He's wrong.
Don't go away. I always do a good first draft. Well, I always do a first draft. It's seldom good. I always do a first draft, and then for me, I have to go back and do a second draft, a real solid second draft, before I even consider showing it to anybody. And then I'll go through and do another pass of fine-tuning of kind of tweaking this and that. But for me, I don't have a workable draft until my second pass at it, and then I'll go through and do another kind of quick edit, another read through, take out some of the sneaky prose killers, those types of things. So by the time I'm sending off to a publisher, it's probably the 4th revision that I've done. The first revision, the second draft, is always the largest. 3, 4, and 5 are usually a little more streamlined, and it's just kind of tweaking here and there and changing a phrase or dropping a couple words or whatever the case may be. Pops, how about you?
I tend to revise as I go. I'm not the Dean Koontz where you don't do page 2 till page 1 is perfect. I don't have that kind of discipline, but often I'll do a few chapters and then I'll take a good portion of a day and go back and review those and rewrite them. Then I move on and then I go back and do it all over again. So I tend to do it as I go along, but I always go over it at the end. And usually the way I do that is I let my computer read it to me because I'll hear problems before I'll see them.
I started doing that.
Yeah, I let my computer read it to me, and then I can pick up on a lot of things. Or if there's redundancies in the sentence, or if it's just clumsy, it sounds bad, and so they're much easier to recognize. Because if I read it, I will edit as I read it. That is, I will put information in. I'll read it the way I think it ought to be instead of the way I actually wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a different voice read it to me helps quite a bit.
There's if you're interested, I haven't put this in the show notes or anything. I think it's called Balboca. I'm going to check my computer real quick. It's a free text-to-speech software. Balabolka, Balabolka is what I use to do that, and it's got a bunch of different voices and some that are like not super annoying, like they actually sound legitimate, not like soulless robots. They just sound like soulless people. Balabolka, Balabolka. So that's another good.
Well, before you do that, check your accessibility what's the word, setup in your computer. I use Apple, for example, and it's just set up to read to you. It's very easy, but you can just set it to do that. Your iPad and stuff will read to you too, but you go through accessibility, and it's designed for blind people or people with very poor eyesight, so that it'll read to them. Well, we writers get to use that too, and so I would check that first. I can't speak for Windows machines because I haven't used a Windows machine in so long now. I don't know what it is. Back when I did, I think I bought voices for it, readers for it, but it's a lot of years have passed since then. So now I think they're standard in some operating systems.
Yeah, Microsoft, it's standard too. It's just not super user intuitive. The Balaboka will actually allow you to save text files as MP3s and documents as MP3s. It'll read it for you and then save it as an MP3, so you can listen on your car or your MP3 player or iPad or whatever it is as you're driving. So that's a nice one too. So anyhow, there's all that. So next week we will be talking about the physical aspect of characters, and so that's a good one. It's one of my favorites. Make sure you tune in for that Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Don't forget, we need some more Ask the Author questions. So Facebook me, tweet me, email us at firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. However you can get the question to us, we'll start answering them again next week. So you can always find Pops at altongansky.com. You can find Molly at franklyMyDearMojo.com. And you can find me at aarongansky.com. And Heather Luby, who may be on next week, I'll have to talk with her. You can find her at heatherluby.com. So we thank you all for listening, and until next week, good writing.